Our third principle calls us to acceptance and to encouragement of spiritual growth. It calls us to strive towards these things in ourselves and our congregations. And the thing is, in a faith tradition that balances individuality and interconnection, this is a fine, delicate dance. It's not a new balance in our faith, but what makes our faith tradition part of what it has been and is. Individuals and congregations have struggled since long before the Unitarian Universalist merger with these questions, and their struggles haven't always been simple or pretty. How do we accept one another and still encourage, press gently, each one of us towards a lifespan of growth? In the Unitarian Universalist tradition, as the traditions merged into what we have now, times of conflict in our faith paralleled times of conflict in our culture. And so very much of this conflict in the culture has been centered on race, racial justice, and the deep injustice of a society.
Want to take the book over the maps? Babs will help me find a picture.
And so very much of this conflict in this culture has been centered on race, racial justice, and the deep injustice of a society that is built around a racial caste system. Reverend Susan Frederick Gray spoke at the 2022 UUA General Assembly in June as the president of the organization. Her entire 37-minute report is online and it is absolutely worth watching. We're gonna watch one little clip of the video, about 10 minutes together today. You should go home and watch the whole thing. In her remarks this year, Reverend Susan Frederick Gray shares the way that the cultural and faith conversations on racial justice work have most recently emphasized the balance of the third principle between acceptance and encouragement to spiritual growth. The way that justice work creates experiences of conflict and also experiences of deep connection for Unitarian Universalists.
Powerful is the conflict, though. That's rooted in racism. When there is conflict in society, we often experience it in our congregations. There's nothing new about that. It's part of being a tradition that's not rooted in the past, but in the here and now. One of the things I am most proud of as your president is our anti-racism work. It is powerful, beautiful, and liberating. It is a part of the joy that gives me life. And while we recognize that culture change is difficult and uncomfortable, it is how we grow spiritually as human beings. This work is the deepest expression of our values. And we have a generational opportunity to be the kind of just and anti-oppressive faith community that we imagine and that we talk about. And there are those who oppose. There are those who oppose our focus on anti-racism work and dismantling white supremacy culture within and beyond our religious community. This is not new. Historically, this work has always been met with resistance. As much as we claim the history of abolitionists and anti-racists, it isn't the whole story. Yes, we are the tradition of U.S. Senator Charles Sumner, a fierce and dedicated anti-racist who was beaten viciously on the floor of Congress for daring to name explicitly the depraved abuse of his slave-owning colleagues. But we are also the tradition of pro-slavery Senator John C. Calhoun. Yes, we are the tradition of Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, an African-American poet, abolitionist, and suffragette. And we were the faith community of U.S. President Millard Fillmore, who signed the Fugitive Slave Act. We are the faith of Wastewill and Martha Sharp, who resisted the Nazis and provided safe passage for refugees. And we were the tradition of Charles William Eliot, president of Harvard, who, among other Unitarians, were supporters and funders of the eugenics movement. We are the faith of James Reeb and Viola Luzo, who we honor as martyrs in the civil rights movement. And we were also a General Assembly who in 1963 defeated a bylaw change that would have required UU congregations to admit people to membership regardless of race, color, or national origin. No, we defeated it in 1963. We defeated it. Said it was a violation of congregational polity. We struggle with our understanding of freedom. Somehow, freedom to segregate was more important than the freedom of Black people, Black Americans, to come into any one of our congregations and be welcomed, and to say that we believe that as a practice for our whole faith. Yes, this is who we are. This is who we've been. I mean, it's all here. This history tells the story of Unitarian Universalists willing to risk their lives for a future of justice, equity, and freedom for all, and it tells the history of UUs who resisted change and defended and protected the status quo in moments when the times called for courage and boldness. The facts of this complicated history are important to know and to grapple with as uncomfortable truths. And the arc of where we have come honors the courage of those who came before. The stories from this history, particularly the ones we tell again and again, reflect the paths that Luzo and Reeb and Harper and Sumner built. They reflect the songs they sang that we have chosen to keep following. I believe that something has shifted in us. It's been building for some time. It is evident in the resolution toward an anti-racist UUA passed 25 years ago at the 1997 General Assembly, which resulted in the creation of the Journey Towards Wholeness Transformation Committee. And while there was lots of resistance in response to that resolution, the embrace of this work has only continued to grow. It was apparent in 2019, just a few years ago, when a survey of the General Assembly led by the Commission on Institutional Change found that nearly 91% of respondents ranked anti-racism work as of primary importance, with nearly 60% ranking it as the highest priority. Clap for that. And we witnessed it again last year when our General Assembly overwhelmingly adopted the Statement of Conscience, undoing systemic white supremacy. There has emerged and grown over these last 25 years a powerful consensus across our movement for the centrality of this work. We have built the grassroots momentum to sustain our anti-racism work in an ongoing way, perhaps for the first time. Now, this doesn't mean that the work is easy or that there's only one way to do it. Dismantling systemic racism and white supremacy is long-haul work that requires an ability to embody a learning community way of being, a both-and approach that can hold multiple experiences, that can nurture the kind of trust that allows for truth-telling, and practices that foster repair and forgiveness. It means centering the voices and investing in leaders from communities that have been marginalized in our tradition. It requires being a living tradition that trusts the dawning future more. So how do we meet this moment? Who are we called to be? How is love calling us? Let me say it plainly. We are called to anti-racist work. We are called to it. We cannot be the people that we say we are. We cannot love the values that we say we love, the values of human dignity, justice, compassion, democracy, truth, peace, if we do not commit ourselves to dismantling systems of oppression within ourselves and our society. And this commitment is rooted in our theology. It is our theology that is the foundation of this calling and this work. A theology which affirms the truth that no one is outside the circle of love, and that liberation is only possible when everyone is free.
Word.
Liminal times need moral and faithful communities to provide a clarion call for what is next. We have to fight and boldly proclaim what is next. A faith, a prophetic faith that proclaims the truth that makes us free. And when I hear those words, a truth that makes us free, I remember Universalist forefather Hosea Ballou, who understood that God's love was universal and that salvation is for everyone. And he believed that God's desire for humanity was happiness and joy. Ballou knew the reality of human suffering and knew the causes of it were as much rooted in humanity and our selfishness as is our capacity for compassion and care. He argued that theologies that imagine God as vengeful and punishing reinforced those ideas in our society, and that they separated us from God's love and from one another and from the goodness and joy that is possible and is an inherent gift. When I think about that truth that sets us free, I imagine Ballou's spiritual imagination.